I'm very excited to introduce to you Dr. Prakash Nagarkatti. Dr. Nagarkatti is the Vice President of Research at USC, and he has been doing world-renowned research on cannabis and cannabinoid medicine right there in Columbia, just 2 blocks away from the State House. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to Dr. Nagarkatti, and he'll share a little bit about the research that he's been doing.
Good afternoon, everybody. I see that you guys are looking really relaxed, I think because you got to sleep 1 extra hour today. And that is because your endocannabinoid levels have gone up. That makes you sleep very well. So in today's talk, I'll also talk about how we produce cannabinoids, very similar to the cannabinoids that are found in the marijuana plant. And those cannabinoids, we call them as endocannabinoids. And those endocannabinoids are critical for us to eat well, to sleep well, to relax, and all those physiological functions would not have been possible without these endocannabinoids that we produce. May I have the first slide, please? So marijuana is not a new plant. It has been known for several centuries, almost dating back to almost 5,000 years ago. It was extensively used in India and China, both in Chinese medicine as well as Indian medicine, what is called as Ayurveda. And in fact, recently they discovered an old Chinese tomb dating back to almost 2,700 years ago. And what they found was, along with the skeleton, they found several pounds of marijuana plant. So that goes to demonstrate how in ancient civilization, they respected and they knew the medicinal values of marijuana plant, because of which they almost thought that it was like a miracle plant. Because those days we didn't have any of these new drugs that are available right now. So the only plant or the only product that they could use to treat pain and suffering was using the marijuana plant. Next slide, please. So marijuana has over 400 chemicals, and out of those chemicals, about 60 of those chemicals are called as cannabinoids. And they're called cannabinoids because we express certain receptors on which they bind. So the receptor and the ligand is almost like a lock and a key. The lock is a receptor and the key is the ligand. So these chemicals can open that lock so that you can carry out various physiological functions. So it's important to remember that marijuana plant has 2 major compounds that have been well studied. Out of those 60 cannabinoids, only 2 have been very well studied. The first one is called as the delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, which is the psychoactive compound. Okay? And then you have another compound called cannabidiol, or CBD, which is non-psychoactive, so it has no psychotropic properties. So just to give you a little bit of history, that marijuana plant was brought to the United States in around 1611 to 1762 by the Jamestown settlers. In 1840, marijuana became the mainstream medicine actually in the West. In 1850, marijuana was added to the US pharmacopoeia. And in 1930s, actually, American pharmaceutical firms used to sell the marijuana as medicines actually. So, however, in 1970, the US federal agencies introduced, I think it was President Nixon who introduced the Controlled Substance Act, in which they classified various drugs, whether they are useful or not useful, and they put marijuana as no accepted medical use. So they put it under what is called as class 1 of the 5 classes of drugs that they classified. That was put under class 1 drug, saying that class 1 drugs are having absolutely no medicinal value, and that's why they're put under class 1. So the class 1 includes compounds like heroin, ecstasy, LSD, and unfortunately marijuana was put under Schedule 1, because of which it's become extremely difficult to do research for most basic scientists as well as for the clinicians, because it's a Schedule 1 drug. So what is Schedule 1? It says is, currently there's no accepted medicinal value, right? Next slide will show you that actually if you look at who holds the patent for use of marijuana for medicinal values is actually the US government, the NIH, the National Institute of Health. Patent number listed there clearly indicates that marijuana has beneficial effects to treat neurological diseases as well as it is a potent antioxidant. So this was the patent that was filed by the United States government, and they still have that patent. FDA has also approved a synthetic form of THC, what is called as Marinol, for treating, Mal was just talking about treating his relatives, that is cancer patients who are taking chemotherapy and radiation therapy to prevent nausea and vomiting, as well as to gain weight, as well as in HIV/AIDS patients. Marinol or synthetic THC is being used, and that is approved by the FDA. There is also another drug which is introduced by GW Pharmaceuticals very recently. It's a combination of THC and CBD. It's approved all over Europe, Canada, not yet approved in the United States for treatment of multiple sclerosis, which is an autoimmune disease, as well as recently what is called as Epidiolex, which is a cannabidiol, and clinical trials have shown that it's very effective against certain forms of epilepsy, like what Jill was talking about. So I feel like there is some hypocrisy here. On one hand, the federal government says, no, we want to put marijuana in the Schedule 1 drug because it has got no medicinal values. But the same federal agency also says and has approved use of marijuana constituents for various medicinal purposes. Next. Now, some people may say that, marijuana is addictive and therefore it might kill people and all that. But if you look at the data, virtually there is not a single instance of overuse or abuse of marijuana leading to any death, because they've shown that marijuana is relatively non-toxic compared to other drugs, either prescribed or particularly you must have heard about the opioid crisis right now, where hundreds of people die every day because of overdose, but you'll never have that problem with marijuana. Next slide will show you the addiction rate for various compounds. If you look at tobacco, 32% can become addictive, heroin 23%, cocaine 17%, alcohol 15%, and the addiction for cannabinoids or marijuana is almost the same as for coffee. So yes, there is a potential that normal individuals who abuse marijuana might might get addicted, but it's a small percent. But again, as I said before, we're not promoting use of marijuana for recreational purposes. What we are saying is it should be allowed for medicinal purposes. Now we talked about the effect of marijuana, some being psychoactive and some being non-psychoactive, right? So the marijuana cannabinoids act on two types of receptors. One receptor is expressed in the brain, and that is called as the CB1 receptor. So when cannabinoids like THC bind to the CB1 receptors, it causes psychotropic effects, okay? But then there is another type of receptor called as CB2, which is expressed on our immune cells. These are the cells that protect us against infections. These are the cells that protect us against cancers. So they are totally different types of receptors called CB2. And when cannabinoids activate the CB2 receptors, you don't have any psychotropic effects. So that's why compounds which are non-psychoactive can bind to the CB2 receptors. So when I started doing research way back in year 2000, I was at the Medical College of Virginia, and I was looking at the literature which shows that these immune cells express cannabinoid receptors. So I tried to look at, wow, why are these immune cells expressing cannabinoid receptors? And I could not find any literature, I could not find any published studies. So that got me excited about trying to find out what are these immune cells, why are these immune cells expressing the CB2 receptors, and what are their functions. That led to major findings in our research lab. So it's important to remember that CB receptors, cannabinoid receptors, have evolved over 600 million years. Every vertebrate species that we have on Earth expresses these cannabinoid receptors, which goes to demonstrate that they have been very carefully preserved during evolution, which goes to demonstrate that these cannabinoid receptors play a very critical role in our normal physiological functions. So therefore, any disruption in these receptors can lead to various disease or disease conditions. The cannabinoid receptors have existed before the introduction of the cannabis or marijuana plant, which evolved only about 25 million years ago. So that means to say that these receptors existed even before the marijuana plant got evolved on planet Earth. Like as I was saying in the introduction, it's not only that the marijuana has these cannabinoids, but we also produce our own cannabinoids, and those are called as endocannabinoids. These endocannabinoids bind to the CB1 receptors in the brain, as well as to the immune cells, and regulate the functions such as sleep and appetite and all that. I'm sure you're going to ask me that if we produce our own endocannabinoids, then why are we not high all the time? And the reason for that is we produce in small amounts, and as soon as we produce those, there are certain enzymes like fatty acid amide hydrolase that break down these endocannabinoids, and that's why we don't have very high levels of endocannabinoids all the time. So which goes to demonstrate that, why are certain diseases triggered, like autoimmune diseases or immunological diseases or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or epilepsy. Is it possible that these diseases are triggered because we don't produce enough cannabinoids? Is it possible because we have mutations in those receptors? That's why we cannot function properly? And if that is true, what is happening is when people are taking marijuana cannabinoids, it's almost like you have a vitamin deficiency, vitamin A or vitamin C, and if you have deficiency you get a disease and you try to take a vitamin supplement, right? So it is possible, and more research is showing that a lot of these diseases in which we don't have really the known etiology may be triggered by defects in our endocannabinoids that we produce, as well as the receptors. So therefore, when we take marijuana cannabinoids as an external source, we feel good, or those symptoms are decreased because of the fact that it's trying to supplement those endocannabinoids. Next slide, please. So next a few slides I will show you some highlights of our research on cannabinoids, and particularly the question of whether cannabinoids can be used in the treatment of inflammation. Inflammation is our immune response to infections, right? Whenever you get infection, bacterial infection, or you get flu or any type of infection, your immune system gets activated. That's called inflammation. Inflammation is also triggered when you touch poison ivy, poison oak, you have nickel, if you have allergy to nickel, autoimmune diseases, allergies, if you are bitten by a bee venom, it's all inflammation. That is your immune system producing all these cytokines and chemokines and causing the disease. So this inflammation is kept under control by regulatory mechanisms. So after you clear the infection, the inflammation goes back to its normal level, so that now you're a normal individual, right? But sometimes what happens is the inflammation or the accelerator, there's no brake system, the accelerator keeps going, and as a result of which you can get chronic inflammation, in which the balance is tilted towards chronic inflammation. And the next slide shows you chronic inflammation is considered by clinicians right now to be the underlying cause of all these diseases. If you get heart attacks, if you have neurological diseases like Alzheimer's, you have PTSD, you have autoimmune diseases, cancer, obesity, aging, they're all triggered by chronic inflammation that you're not able to keep under control. And what our research has shown that cannabinoids can suppress chronic inflammation. And there are a large number of diseases, what are called as autoimmune diseases, in which your immune system goes haywire. Chronic inflammation destroys your brain, your liver, your intestines, kidneys, and so on and so forth, arthritis. So these are the diseases in which there is very strong inflammation, chronic inflammation that destroys your organs. So currently there is no treatment or there is no cure for cancer. There are treatments available like immunosuppressive drugs that are very toxic. And so the goal was to find out, our research, what does cannabinoid, or what do they do in terms of their effect on inflammation. And what we are able to show is that when these cannabinoids bind to the receptors on immune cells, the immune cells undergo apoptosis, or they die through a process of DNA fragmentation. And again, those of you who are students of science must have heard about apoptosis or DNA fragmentation, in which activation of these receptors will make those cells commit suicide. That means these angry macrophage and immune cells that are able to attack these tissues are killed by the cannabinoids. So we looked at autoimmune hepatitis, which is an autoimmune disease in which your liver is destroyed by chronic inflammation. And we're able to show that, next slide please, that you get severe inflammation in the liver, and that can be completely suppressed by the cannabinoid THC. If you look at the liver enzymes, they shoot up within a matter of few hours after the liver damage starts, and you can see that these cannabinoids can completely suppress these liver enzymes, thereby showing that they can completely protect the liver from being destroyed by the immune cells. So we also looked at the non-psychoactive cannabidiol to see whether that can prevent inflammation in the liver, and we are able to show, next slide, that yes, even the cannabidiol was able to similarly suppress inflammation in the liver. So in fact, we have a patent at University of South Carolina. We did this research. We have a patent, and that patent has been licensed to a pharmaceutical company called Revive Therapeutics, and they have applied to FDA for an orphan drug status to treat autoimmune hepatitis, because currently there's no treatment available to prevent these patients from dying because of liver failure. So we'll be excited to watch and see whether FDA is going to approve that as an orphan drug. We also looked at MS, multiple sclerosis, in which your immune system destroys the brain, thereby causing paralysis. And our results showed that, clearly the CBD and THC were able to suppress the clinical inflammation that is seen in the brain as well. We looked at colitis, in which immune system destroys the colon and causes colon cancer, and we're able to show that, again, you can see here the inflammation that is seen with colitis can also be suppressed by cannabinoids by directly targeting these cannabinoid receptors. This is an exciting finding. I'm sure you've heard about the fact that when patients are admitted for surgery, they get staphylococcal bacterial infection, and they go through sepsis, and suddenly, doctors are not able to diagnose that a patient is going through sepsis, and then by the time they realize what has happened is the bacteria have produced staphylococcal endotoxin, or the toxins, and those toxins can activate the immune system to an extent that they will produce so much of cytokines that there is organ failure and people die. So once it's a late stage of sepsis, you don't have any other treatment. The patients just die. What we are able to show is that in mice, if you give staphylococcal enterotoxin, 100% of the mice die within a matter of few days. But if you treat these mice with THC, 100% of those mice will survive, thereby showing that THC is perhaps one of the most potent immunosuppressive drugs that we have been able to screen compared to other compounds like cyclophosphamide or cortisols and so on and so forth. Uveitis, there's been also evidence to show that uveitis is triggered by inflammation in the eye, and they've shown that, for example, drops having THC or CBD can help suppress inflammation and prevent uveitis as well. How about cancer? So our lab was the first one to demonstrate that when normal cells become cancerous or they get transformed, they continue to express these cannabinoid receptors. And therefore, just like the activated immune cells, the cancer cells can also be killed by marijuana cannabinoids. And we published this in a famous journal called as Blood way back in year 2000, and showing how it can be killed. Next slide. We'll show you one of the documentaries that was prepared by PBS, what is called as Clearing the Smoke. Highlights 1 hour documentary. It highlights about 20 minutes of our research, because we were the first lab in the world, and also to have a patent demonstrating that cannabinoids can kill the cancer cells as well. So again, if you're interested, you can watch that by Googling. You'll be able to watch that 1 hour PBS show as well. These are some of the cancer cells that are dying from the process, what I call as apoptosis. And this was also an interesting study where we injected cancer into animals, and we find that 100% of the animals develop cancers. If you treat them with THC, almost 1/2 of them there is regression of tumor, the other half completely the tumor disappears. And once these animals are cured of the tumor, they're resistant to re-challenge with the same tumor. Even if you give them almost as many as 200 million cancer cells, the animals will reject, thereby showing that it is very effective. I'll just skip that slide. Next slide, please. Okay, there is another disease called as graft versus host disease. That means when your patients are treated with high dose of radiation and chemotherapy, their bone marrow gets destroyed. So therefore, you have to transplant the bone marrow from another individual. And if the bone marrow is not matched between the donor and the recipient, then what can happen is there will be a graft versus host disease. And once the graft versus host disease sets in, it's very difficult to treat that. And what we are able to show is that, next slide. So this is the graft versus host disease. This is the normal size of the spleen. And look at the graft versus host disease. The spleens are enlarged dramatically because of the constant immune cell attack. And we are able to show that THC was highly able to suppress graft versus host disease. And not only that, these animals were completely cured. We could completely cure the graft versus host disease using the cannabidiol or THC. These are again histopathology sections to prove that. Next slide, please. We also looked at brain cancers. You must have heard about glioblastomas or neuroblastomas. These are cancers that originate in the brain that are extremely difficult to treat. And you must have heard about Senator Edward Kennedy as well as Senator John McCain have these types of cancers. And once you get them, they're extremely difficult to treat. What we are able to show is that, next slide, you can't see it here because there's too much of light here, is that these cancers express the cannabinoid receptors. And when we incubated these cells with our cannabinoids, they were completely destroyed. And experimental studies also showed that the cannabinoids are highly effective. So in summary, therefore, what I can say is that our research has shown that once the immune cells get activated, they express high levels of these cannabinoid receptors. And the same thing with cancers, they express these cannabinoid receptors. Therefore, the marijuana cannabinoids as well as the cannabinoids we produce on our own are able to kill these cells, thereby controlling inflammation, as well as able to control the cancers. And clearly, more research needs to be done, particularly the clinical trials, and that has been hampered by the fact that, as I said, THC and CBD have been classified as scheduled class 1 drugs. Recently, this year, the National Academy of Sciences, which is one of the most prestigious association of scientists, reviewed almost 10,000 publications in marijuana research or cannabinoid research, and they came up with the conclusion that clearly marijuana is highly effective to reduce chronic pain. It's very effective to treat chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting in cancer patients, and it's very effective in the treatment of multiple sclerosis, which is one of the autoimmune diseases, which is very similar to what research we have been doing for the last 17 years and we have been publishing. It's the same thing that National Academy of Sciences was able to come up with as well. So as Jill said, there are over 29 states and DC have legalized marijuana, and therefore I also feel, based on our research, that the state of South Carolina should be able to also make it legal for medicinal purposes, not for recreational purposes. And I think I want to thank Senator Davis for his role in trying to promote this bill as well. Next slide, please. So again, our research is funded by the National Institute of Health. We have $25 million centers, 2 NIH centers funded by the National Institute of Health, looking at not only cannabinoids but also various botanicals or plant-derived compounds like indoles, resveratrol, and so on and so forth. And I want to thank all these people who are scientists who are working, as well as grad students and undergrad students who are working, who are responsible for generating most of the data. I want to acknowledge them as well. Next slide, please. And again, I want to thank Jill for giving me this opportunity. And I will, before I end my talk, I'd just like to say, one thing, what I feel, this is my personal opinion, is that there are patients, because of because not that they did something wrong, but because of their genes or because of the epigenome, they suffer from these chronic diseases, whether it's epilepsy, whether it's cancer, whether it's autoimmune diseases, and so on, right? And there are currently no established treatments available for them. And they are saying that, here is a medicinal plant provided by Mother Nature, and we want to use that. And we, who are normal people, are telling them, no, you can't use that. No, you can't use that. Why? Because we normal people might get addicted to that if you start using it. And I feel that's not fair. I'll stop at that. I would be happy to answer any questions, or do you want me to?
Is your research available online?
Yes, so if you do a PubMed and search, put in Nagarkatti, you will get almost 300 publications. So,
thank you.
Right. And you can do, even if you want to fine tune that further, you can put Nagarkatti and marijuana or Nagarkatti and cannabinoids. It will give you a list of all the publications that we published.
Thank you.
I got a question.
Yes.
You talk about the preventive or the curing effect of marijuana and THC. Would ingesting a small amount of marijuana or smoking a joint now and then have a preventive effect?
That's a great question. So as long as you have significant levels of THC or CBD in your system, and if you are prone to a disease, which could be, like, say, you have you have a gene that might lead you to develop chronic inflammation in the colon, leading to colitis or leading to colon cancers down the road, maybe 10, 15, 20 years later, then of course, when you have these circulating cannabinoids in your system, by taking small amounts, that's going to help you prevent developing the chronic inflammation, as well as prevent the development of colon cancers. And our research has shown that clearly.
question.
Yes, I'll just take this question.
Has there been anything specifically done on bladder cancer that you know of?
The question was, is there anything known about bladder cancer? I don't know precisely whether bladder cancer expresses cannabinoid receptors. There are about 8 or 10 different types of cancers which have been shown to express these cannabinoid receptors. Therefore, most probably they are going to be effective in the treatment of using the cannabinoids. But I'll have to do a search and let you know. But again, if you go to PubMed and you just put bladder cancer and cannabinoid receptors, it will tell you whether there are any publications or not. And that would indicate if they do express cannabinoid receptors, most likely that they're going to be sensitive to cannabinoid treatment.
Thank you.
Somebody else?
My question is, what
Yes.
is the medical community's take on this topic in the state? So the South Carolina Medical Association and other medical groups.
Yeah, so the question was, what do the medical community take from this? That's a great question, and I think it's a little bit more philosophical question in that the physicians try to prescribe medicines only after they are approved by the FDA, right? The physicians don't feel comfortable in just hearing from patients that it's working and trying to give them medicines based on that. So clearly, I think we need to do more research, and I think FDA should be allowing clinical trials using medical marijuana. That means marijuana that is known to have specific levels of THC and specific levels of CBD. It's not difficult to do that. We can clearly identify the amount of THC and CBD found in the marijuana plant, and once we quantitate that and use that for clinical trials. And again, I want to also stress the fact that in Israel, for example, they already have started treating cancer patients and patients with autoimmune diseases with these cannabinoids because they already done the clinical trials and they find it's very effective. So for the medical community to accept, we need to do more clinical trials. And what we have done in our lab is all basic research, which is necessary for FDA to approve doing clinical trials.
Okay. My interest in this topic is, I'm an internist, a local physician, but I also practice functional medicine, which in essence is physiologic medicine based on how the body works. And so in my practice, I emphasize the use of lifestyle, dieting, nutrition, and supplementation. So this is something that naturally I'm interested in, and that's why I'm here. So, and that's why I asked the question. I'll be more than interested. I'll be glad.
Right. So because right now, hemp oil, which does not have THC or less than 0.03% THC, but which is very high in CBD, is legal in South Carolina, and you can buy that. And again, Jill talked to you about that. That you can prescribe somebody who has got inflammation. Somebody is talking about aches and pains all the time. You could ask them to try using that because it's not illegal. But we cannot prescribe in the state of South Carolina an oil which has high levels of THC and CBD, because the moment you have THC, it becomes illegal here in the state of South Carolina. That's what I think Senator Davis and Jill, they're trying to help promote that so that it's available for you physicians like you to try to prescribe that to see whether it works or not.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
If you had the oil, you increase the volume that you would be using for treatment, given its low percentage of CBD or THC in South Carolina, in the treatment of chronic pain and so forth.
No, I think it's, as long as we know the constituents in the hemp oil, we know that hemp oil that is available everywhere has very low THC, which is legal, 0.03%, but it has different levels of cannabidiol, right? So what we have shown is that about 100 milligrams per kilo body weight of cannabidiol is very effective. And if you go to GW Pharmaceuticals, they have clinical trials that have been done in Europe and in Canada, where they use the hemp oil having known levels of CBD, and that might give us some idea as to how much you can use for treatment of different types of conditions. And one of the things that you need to be careful is always start with low concentrations and gradually increase to see your tolerance. Yes, sir.
What was the name of the documentary on PBS that you said y'all were cited in?
It's called Clearing the Smoke.
Clear.
It's a PBS documentary, and if you just Google Clearing the Smoke PBS documentary, it will bring that up. And it's a wonderful documentary, which is really nice about patients having cancers as well as other diseases. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if it reacts negatively with other medications?
That's a great question. The question was, do we know if CBD or THC negatively interact with other medicines? And that's a very legitimate question. So therefore, CBD oil, which is legal, you need to make sure that you inform the physicians that you are taking or you are trying to take. But I think when GW Pharmaceutical introduced the CBD oil or a combination of THC and CBD in Europe and Canada, they did clinical trials and made sure that it was not toxic. But you're absolutely right, we do also research on other, like St. John's wort, for example. We do a lot of research on that. And St. John's wort has a lot of compounds that interfere with other medicines. So therefore, you cannot take St. John's wort with other medicines. But so far, we don't have much information. That's why I keep saying we need to do a lot of clinical research. We need to do a lot of clinical trials. But so far, there's no indication to suggest that there is any interactions. Yes, ma'am.
Can THC alone induce psychosis? Can THC alone induce psychosis?
So the question was, can THC alone induce apoptosis? And the answer is yes, because we have received 100% pure THC from NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, and we added them to the tumor cells that express the cannabinoid receptors, and we found that within a few hours, even the glioblastomas, they completely die. When you use the pure THC into experimental animals, we were able to cure almost 30 to 40% of the animals. And once they were cured, they were totally resistant to that particular cancer. So all of those studies were done with pure THC, purified from the wild plant.
Do you know if there are any similar results with cannabidiol?
Yes, so most of the studies we did with THC, we also tried to reproduce with CBD because it's non-psychoactive. But to really, if you look at the staphylococcal enterotoxin, for example, which causes sepsis, in some of those studies, CBD is not as effective as THC. So in terms of its ability to kill the immune cells or cancer cells, I think THC is much more potent. The reason being, THC acts through CB1 and CB2 receptors. CBD does not bind to CB1 or CB2 receptors. It acts through some other pathway, and it's called vanilloid receptors or other receptors are induced. They also shown that cannabidiol can induce your own endogenous cannabinoid levels are increased. They in turn act through CB1, CB2 receptors. So therefore, indirectly, it may be acting, but not directly. So that's the reason THC is much more potent. And that's why, going back to what Jill was saying, that sometimes people with epilepsy find benefit with only CBD oil, but some of them need combination of THC and CBD. And THC and CBD are like cousins. The the toxic effects of THC are neutralized by CBD, and the beneficial effects of CBD are enhanced by THC. That's why a combination of THC and CBD is ideal, but again, patients have to try that out. Okay?
I have a question.
Okay.
Okay, so you are a researcher, and I hear you saying that more research is needed, which I think we all agree about that. What is your feeling about states legalizing medical cannabis for patients ahead of that research? Because that's something that we hear time and time again. Oh, we don't want to legalize it because there's not enough research. All we hear is anecdotal evidence, and that's an issue that I have to combat on occasion. So, what is your thought on that?
So even FDA allows the use of certain drugs to treat diseases in which there is no other treatment available by calling them as orphan drugs, right? So, for example, now CBD, they're reviewing our research to see whether they can approve the CBD for treating, autoimmune hepatitis before even they do the clinical trials. So they have that option of approving. So therefore, if the literature clearly shows that millions and millions of people have been using marijuana and there has been no toxicity so far and nobody has died of these marijuana, and people are saying that basic research has shown that clearly it's beneficial, and just because clinical trials have not been done, but the fact that there is no other treatment available for people with certain forms of epilepsy or neuroblastomas or severe forms of autoimmune diseases or PTSD, then they can approve that as orphan drugs. So why not allow the doctors to allow the patients to try it out and see whether it works. We're not talking here about extremely dangerous or toxic chemical here, which has already been used for thousands of years across the globe. So, okay. Okay.
Chronic pain and also in neuropathic pain associated with back pain and so forth. Have you found the combination of cannabidiol and THC better, or which bit one better than the other?
Right. So there are different types of pains. One is a pain that is triggered by inflammation. So where your immune system goes haywire and starts destroying, like arthritis, and so you get such severe pain in the joints and all that. So what our research has shown is that it's very beneficial in that situation. We have not done much studies with, say, diabetic neuropathy, for example. If the nerves are hyper-energized and they send the signals of pain, whether cannabinoids can be useful, it may be, but we have not done research on that. Yes, sir.
Have you linked or seen any differences in CBD from hemp plants versus CBD from cannabis that was actually allowed to flower? And because looking at some studies that I've seen, there is a slight difference in one to be more effective than the other. Since we can only get hemp in South Carolina, they do not allow it to flower. Have you seen any studies with that, or?
Okay. So the question was, have you looked at cannabidiol extracted from the flower versus some other area, or whether the plant is young or when the plant gets old and things like that? The cannabidiol as a chemical is the same, whether you isolate from this plant or that plant or this stage of whatever. But when you're preparing the whole extract or preparing the whole oil, then there will be different levels of other chemicals that are found. There are 60 other cannabinoids that are found, as well as 400 different chemicals that are found. And some people have argued about what is called as the entourage effect. That is, in addition to cannabidiol, there are all these other chemicals that you find in the hemp oil that may be helping the cannabidiol to be successful in its treatment. So therefore, that may be the reason why anecdotally people will say, okay, if you extract from this plant at this particular stage or this particular season, that's best for certain treatments compared to other types of treatments. But if you tell me as a scientist that if there is a pure oil which has only CBD, and we know the constituents of that, then that is not going to change the effect because it's pure CBD that, for example, what we use for our studies. Okay?
On that note, my question is, I don't understand why then hemp would be illegal. I mean, I can't grow in my backyard. Even though CBD is not illegal, and I'm aware there's a small amount of THC, but by the time all the process is done, it's unaffordable for someone who wants to actually, or needs to use it. So it's medicine is right there, but I can't even access it because I can't, afford it. So what's keeping hemp from being made legal so that someone could grow it in their own yard?
So if I understand your question, the question was, why is there restriction of growing hemp, which does not have any THC but only has CBD? Why is there, restriction on that? And that is because what the federal agencies felt was that though hemp has very little amount of THC, very, very little, like less than 0.03%, that farmers might use tons and tons of hemp to extract a few milligrams of THC, which becomes illegal. I mean, this doesn't make any sense, but that's what they said. So that's why they said, we're going to ban. Earlier, they allowed hemp to be grown in US, but they said, once the THC was made Schedule 1, they said, no, there is a possibility. But that's ridiculous because people can synthesize chemically THC in the lab or at home, for example, and they don't have to take the trouble of growing tons of hemp and then extracting 1 or 2 milligrams of THC and then use that for smoking. So sometimes, you all know that, how the government functions, but what can we say? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This has been very informative. It's been very heartwarming. It's been hopeful. But when I leave these doors today, I just came to a seminar. And my heart wants to know, what can I do when I leave these doors today to help you push the FDA to help us heal? What's your direction that you can give me that will best benefit us all?
Right. I think that's a great transition to Senator Davis. I think he's going to talk about what we as citizens should be doing to make sure that when people are suffering because there is no other medication is available, that we as a society, we cannot say no to people because of the potential implications. Because I just talked about alcohol, for example. If we were serving today alcohol to everybody, everybody would be happy, nobody will say anything about it. But if you look at the medicinal benefits of alcohol or whatever, there's nothing. So I feel like, it's just the citizens getting to know that and, they making their politicians and the leaders aware of, what are their needs and what should we be doing as a society. I think that is very critical, and I think I want everybody to be engaged in this process so that we try to bring that kind of a change. I think that's very critical.
And I do appreciate your time, though. I didn't mean to sound disrespectful.
No, you're not. You're not.
Okay,
you're not, because in fact you have been so polite. Whenever I go and give talks, there are people who are against or who feel like this would lead to recreational use of marijuana, and they say, especially for talking about the bad influence or impact of this and all that. So I listen to them, and as I said, my reasoning is the same thing, that as normal citizens we cannot decline people who have been born with their bad genes having so many suffering from so many different diseases, we saying that no, we can't let you have particular treatment because every drug is controlled, right? Whether any medicine that your antibiotics to any type of medicine that doctor gives you is regulated right now. You cannot just go and buy in the pharmacy outside and on over the counter. So why not another medicine that's already available and provided by Mother Nature? So, okay. Jill, you want to comment? Thank you so much.